The airport was buzzing with its usual chaos. People hurried along the polished floors, dragging suitcases that rattled behind them. Announcements over the loudspeakers mixed with the low hum of conversations, the distant beeping of scanners, and the occasional cry of a child. Among all this movement, a woman walked calmly, her posture straight, her eyes focused, yet relaxed. She moved with a quiet confidence that somehow made the noise around her fade into the background. She had a meeting to attend later that day, but for now she was just a passenger like everyone else. Her journey had begun early in the morning. The sun had barely risen, casting a golden glow over the airport's glass facade. She arrived at the terminal with plenty of time, preferring not to be rushed. Time, she believed, was something best handled deliberately. Every step she took was measured. There was a rhythm to her walk, one that suggested purpose and self-assurance. Her clothes were simple but elegant, carefully chosen for comfort and style, reflecting her practical yet sophisticated nature. At the check-in counter, she was greeted politely. She handed over her identification and ticket, and the agent processed her quickly. While she could have used an app and skipped this step entirely, she enjoyed the small interactions that came with human contact. There was a subtle warmth in seeing another person acknowledge her presence, even in a place as impersonal as an airport. She smiled briefly at the agent, who returned it with a nod. It was a small, fleeting connection, but it added a sense of normalcy to her morning. Security was the usual ordeal. Shoes off, laptops out, belts off. She followed the routine with practiced ease. It was in these moments, moving through metal detectors and scanning machines, that the world seemed both ordered and chaotic at the same time. People around her were anxious, shuffling nervously, fumbling with items, whispering to companions. She moved deliberately, keeping a calm exterior, letting no frustration show. A family with young children struggled to keep the little ones organized, and she offered a brief, encouraging smile. Even strangers appreciated a small gesture in moments of stress. Once she passed through security, she made her way to the gate. The waiting area was crowded, a mix of early travelers, business people, families, and tourists. Some were reading books, others scrolling endlessly on phones, a few trying to catch a few more minutes of rest before boarding. She found a spot near the window, watching planes taxi across the tarmac. Each plane was a promise of a journey, a story in motion. She enjoyed observing them, imagining the lives inside, the destinations they were heading to, the people who would meet someone special at the other end, or those who would return to loved ones after a long absence. Soon, the boarding announcement came. Her gate was busy, filled with people lining up in neat but tense queues. She walked calmly to the front of the line, ticket in hand, ready to board. There was no rush in her movements, only confidence. When the attendant scanned her ticket, she smiled politely, thanking them before moving forward. She didn't need to assert herself. Her quiet composure did it for her. On board, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning fluid, mixed with the subtle scent of the ocean outside. Passengers were settling into their seats, some chatting softly, others tapping on tablets or phones. She found her assigned first-class seat and approached it. It was her space, reserved ahead of time, a small piece of comfort in the controlled chaos of air travel. She lifted her bag into the overhead compartment and eased into the seat. The upholstery was soft, and the space was generous. She felt a sense of satisfaction at having a comfortable seat, a small luxury she appreciated fully. That's when she noticed the flight attendant approaching. At first, it seemed ordinary, a standard check of boarding passes and seat assignments. But there was something in the attendant's expression, a hesitation that didn't quite match the usual procedure. The attendant stopped beside her, leaning slightly, as if trying to gauge something beyond the ticket. The woman looked up, meeting her gaze calmly. She had encountered hesitation before in various forms, and she had learned that patience and quiet confidence often said more than words. "Ma'am, may I see your ticket again?" the flight attendant asked, her tone polite but with an edge of doubt. The woman complied without a word, handing over the ticket. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't frown. She simply waited, her hand extended, her posture straight, her expression calm. The attendant scanned it, her eyes flicking up briefly as if seeking some confirmation beyond the printed paper. There was a brief pause, a tension that lingered in the small space between them. Other passengers began to notice, glancing over from their own seats. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Some were curious, others uncomfortable. Airports were full of silent stories, of people carrying their own anxieties and triumphs, and a scene like this drew attention even in a busy cabin. The woman remained composed. She had learned that in moments like these, reacting too quickly often gave others control over the situation. Instead, she allowed the moment to unfold naturally, her confidence speaking louder than any words could. The flight attendant's hesitation grew. She repeated her question in a slightly firmer tone, still polite but clearly testing the woman's response. "Are you sure this is your seat, ma'am?" The woman met her gaze steadily. "Yes," she said simply, her voice calm and clear. No argument, no explanation, just a statement of fact. Her simplicity, her calm, was in itself a declaration. It left no room for doubt, yet it left the flight attendant to confront her own uncertainty. There was a quiet hum of whispers among the nearby passengers, subtle and discreet. People didn't speak out loud, but they noticed. There was a recognition, unspoken, of someone standing firm without drama. In a world where confidence often commanded respect, her demeanor drew attention naturally. It wasn't arrogance. It was poise, a quiet strength that didn't need validation from anyone else. The attendant scanned the ticket. Again, more slowly this time. Perhaps she was checking for something she had missed. Perhaps she was realizing that she had misjudged the situation. Either way, the woman didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Her calm presence filled the space, a quiet assertion of dignity and right. She didn't need to raise her voice or insist aggressively. Her posture, her eyes, her composed expression did the work. Meanwhile, the plane continued to fill. Passengers settled. Conversations started. Children fidgeted. And the hum of the engines waiting to start echoed softly. But in this small corner of first class, a quiet tension lingered. It was not loud or confrontational, yet it was palpable. The woman's calm confidence contrasted sharply with the attendant's subtle unease, drawing attention without a single raised voice. Other travelers nearby felt a sense of admiration. Perhaps they recognized something familiar in her calm control, something they had struggled to achieve themselves. Airports were spaces where people saw slices of human behavior, where small moments could reveal character. Here, the woman's poise was evident, and it subtly shifted the energy in the cabin. Eventually, the flight attendant stepped back slightly, taking a breath. The moment of uncertainty hung in the air, but the woman remained unshaken. She adjusted slightly in her seat, crossed her legs comfortably, and reached for the small bag on the side table. It was a small gesture, but it reinforced her ease and authority in the space. It was clear that she was not someone easily dismissed. Her quiet confidence made it unnecessary for her to speak more than she already had. The plane, the passengers, the crew, all were witnesses to the understated power of composure. The cabin had returned to a sense of normalcy, yet the energy had subtly shifted. A balance of respect and awareness had been established, not through argument or confrontation, but through calm self-assurance. She leaned back slightly in her seat, looking out the window as the sun reflected off the tarmac. She could see the workers preparing the planes, the luggage being loaded, the pilots making final checks. It was a moment of stillness before the journey began. Her mind was focused yet serene, prepared for the flight ahead, but also aware of the subtle dynamics that had just unfolded. In that moment, she understood something familiar but profound. Respect was often commanded quietly, not loudly. People observed, they sensed confidence, and they responded even without words. She had learned this in many areas of her life, and here, in a crowded airplane cabin, it had been affirmed once again. The boarding process continued around her. People moved down the aisles, flight attendants assisted passengers, and the gentle murmur of voices filled the space. Yet, in her corner of first class, a quiet lesson had been made visible. Dignity, calm, and poise could speak volumes, even without a single raised voice. As the plane doors closed and the engines prepared to start, she felt a sense of readiness. Not just for the journey across the sky, but for what lay beyond the airport doors. She had arrived with purpose, and she was leaving the gate having affirmed her presence and her right to occupy her space. The woman adjusted her seat one last time, settling in fully. The hum of the plane's systems, the distant sounds of passengers chatting, and the occasional beep from the cockpit all faded into the background. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, centering herself. The journey was just beginning, but she carried with her the quiet power of confidence, composure, and respect earned. Not demanded, but naturally acknowledged. In that ordinary moment at the airport, among the crowd, the noise, and the routine, something extraordinary had quietly taken place. A small interaction, seemingly simple, had revealed strength, dignity, and human presence. It was a reminder that even in ordinary spaces, the way one carries oneself can leave an indelible mark on those who witness it. The plane waited, engines ready. The world outside was vast and unpredictable. Inside, a calm, assured woman sat poised in her seat, ready for what was to come, having already demonstrated that sometimes the greatest power is held not in loud words, but in silent, unwavering confidence. As the plane hummed softly, waiting for takeoff, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew tense once more. The flight attendant had returned to her duties, but there was a subtle shift in her body language, a slight stiffness, as if the earlier interaction had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She moved down the aisle, checking passengers' seatbelts, offering blankets, and glancing occasionally toward the woman seated in the first-class section. There was a quiet curiosity in her eyes, but also a lingering doubt that hadn't been fully resolved. The woman noticed, of course. She always noticed. People revealed themselves in small gestures, in fleeting expressions, and in moments of hesitation. She had learned over the years that observing quietly often told more than any conversation could. She adjusted her seat, crossed her legs comfortably, and reached for the small bottle of water she had placed on the side table. She didn't act as though she was being watched. She simply carried on with her own routine, calm and assured. Other passengers were starting to settle in, but a few noticed the subtle tension unfolding. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, glancing back and forth. A young woman near the window whispered softly to her companion, nodding toward the first-class section. People were curious, sensing a quiet conflict, but unsure of its nature. The cabin crew tried to maintain a sense of order, but in small, enclosed spaces like this, human dynamics were always magnified. The flight attendant returned once more, approaching the woman with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, I just want to make sure everything is in order before we take off," she said, her voice courteous yet carrying an undercurrent of authority. The woman looked up calmly, meeting her gaze directly. She had anticipated this moment, though she had not expected it to escalate further. Calm and composed, she nodded. "Yes, everything is fine," she replied simply. Her words were short, precise, but carried an unspoken firmness. There was no room for misunderstanding. She didn't need to raise her voice or argue. Her calm certainty was enough to communicate that she would not be swayed by doubt. The flight attendant scanned the area briefly, perhaps searching for some confirmation that she was correct, but she found none. The woman's demeanor left no opening for challenge. Despite this, the attendant persisted, though now more cautiously. "Are you sure you are in the correct seat? Sometimes tickets get mixed up," she said, her tone even but tinged with skepticism. The woman smiled faintly, not with amusement, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the unnecessary question. "I am sure," she said again, her voice steady and confident. "This is my seat." The attendant hesitated. Her eyes flicked down to the ticket in her hand, scanning it again, then back at the woman. For a moment, she seemed to struggle internally, unsure whether to continue pressing the issue or to accept the truth before her. This pause, though brief, was telling. In these moments, Subtle power dynamics played out in ways that words could not fully capture. Around them, passengers began to sense the exchange. A few glanced over, curious, yet careful not to intrude. People often sense tension before understanding its full cause. The woman remained composed, carrying herself with an ease that contrasted sharply with the attendant's growing unease. Her quiet confidence was magnetic. It drew attention without demanding it. It was clear to anyone watching that she was not a person to be underestimated. Finally, the attendant sighed, a small, almost imperceptible exhale, and tried to redirect the interaction professionally. "I apologize, ma'am. I just have to ensure everything is correct before takeoff." Her words were courteous, but her eyes betrayed a hint of discomfort. The woman nodded politely, accepting the apology without comment. There was no need to escalate. She had already made her point. Passengers nearby whispered quietly, some expressing admiration, others curiosity. It was clear that the woman's calm demeanor had left an impression. She didn't boast, she didn't argue, yet she had asserted her presence effectively. The subtle respect that radiated from her was evident, and people around her instinctively noticed. Airports were strange places, filled with temporary interactions, yet moments like these often lingered in memory. The flight attendant returned to her duties, moving down the aisle to check on other passengers. The woman leaned back slightly in her seat, adjusting her position, but her eyes remained observant. She had learned to watch, to notice the little things that revealed character and intention. The attendant's actions had said more about her than any words could. It was a simple truth. People often reveal themselves when they think no one is watching, and here everyone was watching, if only subtly. As the engines began to power up, a low rumble filling the cabin, the woman took a deep breath. The day had already tested her patience and composure in a small but significant way, and she had handled it quietly, gracefully, and firmly. There was a sense of calm control within her, an internal certainty that allowed her to navigate these challenges with poise. She understood that respect was earned through composure, not through confrontation. The flight attendant glanced toward the cockpit briefly, perhaps seeking guidance or reassurance. The pilot, seated ahead, was busy with pre-flight checks, focused on the instruments and the plane systems. There was no indication yet that the pilot had noticed the subtle tension unfolding in the cabin, but the atmosphere carried a weight of quiet expectation. The woman remained still, aware of the dynamics but not reacting hastily. She knew that patience often revealed the truth more effectively than impatience. Other passengers began to settle further. Some adjusted their seats, others closed their eyes, and a few started reading or using devices. The cabin, though still filled with human presence, seemed to quiet slightly, as if subconsciously respecting the subtle exchange that had taken place. The woman's quiet confidence had shifted the energy in the space. Her presence, calm and unwavering, commanded attention without effort. The flight attendant returned one final time before takeoff, approaching with a neutral, professional expression. "Everything is ready for departure, ma'am," she said, her tone careful, respectful, and free of doubt this time. The woman nodded politely, acknowledging the statement. She had maintained her composure throughout, neither seeking confrontation nor retreating from it. The dynamic had shifted subtly, the unspoken understanding of authority and respect now clearly established. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, the woman looked out the window. The tarmac stretched endlessly, planes lined up in orderly fashion, ground crew moving efficiently. The engines roared softly, and the sense of anticipation filled the cabin. It was a familiar moment for any traveler, yet for her, it carried a subtle significance. She had navigated a challenge with grace, asserting herself not through force, but through calm certainty. Passengers around her adjusted, sensing the tension dissolve. Some whispered to companions about the quiet exchange they had observed. Others remained silent, simply absorbing the presence of someone who commanded respect effortlessly. It was not a display meant for attention, yet attention had been given naturally. Respect had been conveyed, subtly but unmistakably, and the atmosphere in the cabin reflected that balance. The plane continued to move steadily toward the runway. The woman settled into her seat, adjusting the small pillow behind her back. She remained alert, observant of the subtle cues around her, but at the same time, she allowed herself a moment of relaxation. She had handled the challenge with grace, demonstrating patience, poise, and quiet strength. Her demeanor had shifted the energy in the first-class cabin, reminding everyone that confidence often spoke louder than words. The flight attendant moved away, returning to other duties, but the earlier tension lingered subtly. It was the kind of moment that didn't require loud confrontation to leave an impression. The woman's calm, unwavering confidence had done the work for her, and the passengers nearby could sense it. Respect, once subtly challenged, had been quietly re-established, and the cabin's atmosphere reflected that acknowledgement. The engine's hum grew stronger, signaling the imminent takeoff. The woman adjusted slightly in her seat, preparing for the familiar sensations of ascent. Her mind was focused yet calm. She had handled an unnecessary challenge with dignity, and now she could focus on the journey ahead. The lesson was simple. Composure and confidence often convey far more than words or argument ever could. As the plane lifted off the ground, a sense of calm spread through her. The city below shrank gradually, buildings and roads fading into a patchwork of colors and shapes. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, mingling with the soft murmur of passengers, and yet she felt entirely at ease. She had navigated a moment of tension with patience and grace, and now the journey could continue without distraction. In that quiet space, surrounded by people but entirely self-contained in her composure, she reflected briefly. Life often presented unexpected challenges, small tests of character that revealed more than anyone anticipated. Today, in this small but meaningful exchange with the flight attendant, she had demonstrated the quiet power of patience, dignity, and confidence. It was a lesson for herself and inadvertently, for those around her. The first few minutes of flight passed smoothly. Passengers began adjusting, flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, and the soft glow of cabin lights reflected gently off surfaces. Yet, the earlier exchange remained in memory, a reminder of the subtle power of self-assuredness. The woman leaned back slightly, letting the plane's gentle ascent settle her further, observing the cabin with calm awareness. She understood fully that respect was rarely demanded. It was recognized. And in this moment, quiet, composed, and patient, she had been acknowledged without raising her voice. The flight attendant's initial doubt had been transformed into recognition, and the subtle balance of authority had been restored. It was an ordinary day in many ways, but in the quiet moments of human interaction, extraordinary lessons were often revealed. The plane had leveled off now, the city shrinking beneath a soft blanket of clouds, and the hum of the engines was steady and reassuring. Passengers were beginning to relax, some gazing out the window at the ever-changing sky, others adjusting in their seats, opening books or tablets. For most, this was just another flight. But for the woman in first class, the air still carried a subtle tension, the remnants of an earlier interaction that had not yet fully resolved itself. The flight attendant, though moving with the efficiency required of her job, could not completely hide the curiosity and unease she still felt. She passed by the woman a few times, offering small smiles, checking on other passengers, and occasionally glancing back as though to confirm something about the first-class section. The woman noticed, of course, but she remained calm, poised, and unbothered. There was no need to respond to the scrutiny with words. Her composure was a silent answer, quiet but unyielding. Other passengers began to sense something different in the cabin. Some whispered to companions, trying not to be too obvious. "Did you see that exchange?" One murmured softly, glancing at the first-class row. "She didn't say much, but she handled that so well." A few heads turned subtly, observing the woman with quiet fascination. In these enclosed spaces, human behavior became magnified. A small interaction could ripple through the cabin, drawing attention and quietly influencing the mood. As the flight continued, the woman settled more comfortably in her seat. She had taken a moment to adjust her personal space, placing a small notebook on the side table and pulling a pen from her bag. She made a few notes, jotting down thoughts, ideas, and reminders for the meeting she would attend later. It was an ordinary task, yet even in this simple act, she maintained her sense of calm and control. Her presence had a subtle authority, one that did not demand attention but naturally commanded it. The flight attendant returned once again, approaching with a polite but measured expression. "Ma'am, may I ask you a question?" she began, carefully choosing her words. There was a pause, a slight tension in her posture, as if she was trying to gauge how the woman might respond. "Yes," the woman replied simply, her voice calm and steady. She didn't lean forward or shift nervously. She simply met the attendant's eyes, waiting. "I just wanted to understand your ticket and seat arrangement. Sometimes there are mistakes with first-class seating, and I just wanted to make sure everything was correct," the attendant explained, her tone respectful but still tinged with hesitation. It was clear she was trying to navigate the situation carefully, unsure whether to challenge further or step back. The woman nodded slightly, acknowledging the concern but making no excuses. "Everything is correct," she said calmly. "I booked this seat well in advance. There is no mistake." Her words were simple, precise, but carried an unspoken weight of certainty. She didn't need to argue or justify herself beyond the facts. Her composure made it clear that she would not be pushed into doubt or submission. The attendant looked down at the ticket once more, scanning it carefully. Her eyes lifted again, meeting the woman's steady gaze. For a moment, it seemed as if she might continue pressing the issue, but something in the woman's demeanor, a combination of calm authority and quiet confidence, caused her to hesitate. There was an almost imperceptible shift, a recognition that the situation was already resolved without confrontation. Despite this, a flicker of doubt remained. The attendant stepped back, walking down the aisle, but her movement was slower than before. She checked on other passengers, assisting them, but her eyes occasionally drifted toward the woman in first class. There was something she could not ignore, the unmistakable poise and assurance of someone entirely comfortable in her place, someone whose confidence did not require validation. The cabin settled into a low hum of conversation, the subtle clatter of drink carts, and the soft whir of the ventilation system. Yet, beneath this ordinary flight noise, the tension lingered. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it existed. The woman was aware of it, but she did not let it disturb her. She remained composed, observing quietly, her presence serene yet commanding. Passengers began to notice the subtle shift in energy. A man near the window leaned slightly toward his companion, whispering, "There's something about her. She handled that situation with so much confidence." A few others nodded in agreement. It wasn't a matter of confrontation, but of recognition. People sensed strength, calm, and self-assurance when they saw it, and they instinctively noticed it even without fully understanding why. Minutes passed, and the attendant's uncertainty seemed to grow. She moved down the aisle slowly, checking passengers and supplies, her mind clearly still on the first-class section. There was an unspoken question lingering in the air. Who was this woman, and why did she command such quiet respect without a single raised voice? The answer was clear to the woman herself. It was her composure, her quiet confidence, and her refusal to be unsettled that gave her power in this moment. The flight began to reach cruising altitude, the plane steady now, gliding smoothly above the clouds. The engine's soft hum became a constant, almost soothing background. The woman leaned back slightly, adjusting the small pillow behind her neck. She opened her notebook again, jotting a few more notes, her mind focused yet calm. Even in the middle of this unusual tension, she found space to work, to plan, to prepare. Her focus was unshakable. It was then that the pilot, noticing the subtle tension in the cabin, decided to intervene. He had been performing his checks, scanning the instruments and systems, but something had caught his attention. He stepped out of the cockpit briefly, moving down the aisle toward the first-class section. His presence was immediately noticeable. He carried himself with authority, calm and confident, yet approachable. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted slightly as passengers sensed a higher level of oversight entering the space. The woman remained seated, calm and composed, as the pilot approached. He paused briefly, giving the attendant a subtle nod before addressing the woman directly. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful and clear, "I just wanted to personally greet you and make sure everything is comfortable for your flight." His use of ma'am was deliberate, an acknowledgement of her status and presence, a word that carried respect and recognition. The flight attendant's eyes widened slightly. She had expected a routine check or perhaps a small reassurance, but not this direct acknowledgement from the pilot. The shift in energy was immediate. The woman's calm, unshaken demeanor, combined with the pilot's recognition, changed the dynamic completely. The subtle tension that had lingered now began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of the woman's authority in her own space. The woman smiled politely, nodding in appreciation. "Thank you," she said softly. Her tone was modest, yet it carried the same quiet strength that had defined her since boarding. There was no need for further words. The simple exchange, the acknowledgement from someone in authority, had conveyed everything necessary. Passengers nearby noticed the change as well. Whispers turned to subtle nods of admiration. A few passengers exchanged looks of recognition, sensing that something significant had unfolded, even in the ordinary setting of an airplane cabin. It was a reminder that small acts of poise and confidence could shift the energy in a room or even in a plane without confrontation or spectacle. The flight attendant, now fully aware of the shift, returned to her duties with renewed professionalism. She moved efficiently, assisting passengers, her posture straighter, her expressions more careful. The earlier doubt and hesitation had been replaced with respect and understanding. She no longer questioned the woman's presence or authority. The recognition from the pilot had settled the matter completely. The woman settled back in her seat, adjusting her position comfortably. She opened a book, flipping through the pages with a calm focus. Her mind was clear, her thoughts organized, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone entirely at ease with who she was and where she belonged. The cabin, now calm and orderly, reflected that balance of respect and acknowledgement. As the plane continued to cruise steadily above the clouds, the woman's presence remained a quiet force in the cabin. Passengers began to relax fully, flight attendants moved efficiently, and the atmosphere settled into a comfortable rhythm. Yet the earlier events had left a lasting impression. Even ordinary moments, like a simple interaction over a seat, could reveal character, resilience, and composure. The pilot returned to the cockpit, leaving the woman with a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The flight attendant moved efficiently among the passengers, her earlier hesitation replaced by a professional calm. And the woman, at ease in her seat, reflected on the nature of respect. It was not given lightly, nor was it demanded. It was recognized, often silently, through composure, poise, and confidence. Passengers around her occasionally glanced over, sensing the quiet authority she carried. It was not arrogance, but a natural assurance. The woman did not seek attention. She simply existed fully in her space, calm, composed, and unshaken. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone within sight that dignity and confidence were often the strongest forms of power. The remainder of the flight continued smoothly. Drinks were served, conversations took place in soft tones, and the gentle hum of the engines filled the background. Yet the story of the small but meaningful exchange lingered subtly in the minds of those who had observed it. The woman had navigated a challenge without confrontation, had earned recognition quietly, and had demonstrated that respect often comes naturally to those who carry themselves with calm authority. As clouds passed beneath the plane, the woman adjusted slightly in her seat, preparing for the journey ahead. She had faced a moment that could have been uncomfortable, even tense, and had turned it into an opportunity to show composure, strength, and dignity. It was a quiet victory, one that left an impression far greater than the brief exchange itself. Even as passengers began to drift into more ordinary activities, reading, napping, or chatting quietly, the presence of the woman in first class remained subtly influential. She had reminded everyone around her that quiet confidence, patience, and poise could speak more loudly than words, more persuasively than argument, and more powerfully than confrontation. It was a lesson in grace, subtly delivered, yet unforgettable. The pilot returned to the cockpit after his brief walk through the cabin, leaving behind a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The woman remained seated, calm and composed, her posture relaxed but firm, as if nothing had shaken her at all. Yet the energy around her had changed. Passengers glanced over occasionally, quietly observing her with curiosity, admiration, or simply recognition of the strength she carried without needing to announce it. The small ripple of respect she had created continued to move through the cabin. The flight attendant, now more aware of her own behavior, moved with a new professionalism. There was no longer hesitation in her steps or doubt in her expressions. She delivered drinks, assisted passengers with their needs, and managed requests efficiently, all while maintaining a polite distance. It was clear she had internalized the lesson of the interaction without a single word needing to be spoken between them. The woman had commanded respect not through argument, but through calm certainty and self-assurance. Nearby passengers, who had quietly observed the earlier exchange, now whispered among themselves. A woman leaned slightly toward her companion and said, "Did you see that?" She didn't even have to argue, and the pilot respected her immediately. Her companion nodded in agreement, eyes still subtly directed toward the first-class seat where the woman remained poised. Even strangers could sense when someone carried themselves with quiet dignity. It was a magnetic quality that drew acknowledgement naturally. The woman opened her notebook again, this time jotting down ideas for a project she had been thinking about for weeks. She had used the brief moments of tension earlier as a chance to reflect and plan, turning a potentially stressful situation into something productive. Her mind was clear, focused, and undistracted by the drama that had briefly surrounded her. It was this ability to maintain clarity under pressure that often set her apart, a skill honed through years of navigating challenges gracefully. As the flight continued smoothly above the clouds, the attendant returned one more time to the first-class section, approaching the woman with a slightly softer demeanor. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say I hope you're comfortable and that everything is going well. Please let me know if there's anything you need," she said politely. Her voice carried no trace of the earlier doubt, only professionalism and sincerity. The woman looked up from her notebook, offering a gentle smile. "Thank you. Everything is perfect," she replied. Her tone was calm and appreciative, reinforcing the balance of respect that now existed. There was no triumph or arrogance in her words, only grace. The interaction was brief, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The flight attendant returned to her duties, more confident and self-assured in her approach, having learned to respect the woman's presence fully. Around them, the cabin had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Passengers adjusted to the steady flight, some opening magazines, others engaging quietly with tablets or books. Flight attendants moved efficiently, attending to needs, but the earlier tension had given way to a general calm. The woman remained a quiet focal point, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence naturally commanded it. A few passengers caught themselves glancing toward her intermittently, almost instinctively. There was a sense of admiration in these subtle observations. They recognized that she had handled a potentially awkward and stressful situation with poise, grace, and confidence. It was a demonstration of quiet power, one that did not rely on confrontation, loud voices, or theatrics, yet left a lasting impression. The woman adjusted her seat slightly, pulling a small blanket over her lap as she continued writing. She had already transformed the earlier tension into a productive focus, reminding herself that challenges, even small ones, could be turned into opportunities for reflection and planning. Her composure was unshaken, and she carried herself with an ease that made the cabin feel subtly more respectful and orderly. Meanwhile, the flight attendant, now fully aware of the balance in the cabin, approached other passengers with more attentiveness and care. She offered assistance to those struggling with overhead bins, guided families with small children, and maintained a professional but courteous demeanor throughout. Her earlier doubt had been replaced with understanding and a subtle humility, influenced by the woman's quiet strength and the pilot's clear acknowledgement. Passengers who had witnessed the earlier interaction began to relax further, sharing subtle nods and whispers of acknowledgement with one another. Some remarked on the elegance and calm confidence of the woman, others on the professionalism and respect displayed by the flight crew afterward. It was a small but significant reminder that human behavior, even in brief moments, could influence others and leave a lasting impression. The woman leaned back slightly, looking out the window at the endless clouds below. The sun's light reflected softly off their surfaces, casting a warm glow through the cabin. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, appreciating the calm that had settled over the space. The earlier challenge, brief though it had been, had reinforced a simple truth she had long known. Composure and self-assurance naturally command respect. Her thoughts drifted to her upcoming meeting. She felt ready, confident, and prepared, both for the day ahead and for the interactions she would encounter. The flight had already offered a subtle reminder that strength did not always come from argument or assertion, but from clarity, calmness, and dignity. She felt grounded, ready to step into her professional environment with the same poise she had displayed on the plane. The flight attendant passed by again, this time with a small smile that carried genuine warmth. "Please let me know if there is anything I can do for you, ma'am," she said, her tone sincere. The woman nodded in acknowledgement, appreciating the effort and the change in demeanor. The cabin, once slightly tense, now hummed with quiet order, a testament to how small human interactions could ripple outward and influence the environment subtly but profoundly. Nearby passengers continued their activities, but a few still glanced toward the first-class section. There was a silent recognition in their eyes, an acknowledgement of the woman's quiet strength and the respect she had inspired. It was a demonstration that leadership and authority could be expressed without confrontation, that dignity and composure often carried more weight than loud voices or overt displays. The woman continued her work, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally gazing out the window. She allowed herself small moments of observation, noting the subtle dynamics in the cabin and how human behavior shifted in response to calm confidence. She reflected on the pilot's brief intervention, understanding how acknowledgement from someone in authority could shift energy and restore balance. It reinforced a sense of quiet satisfaction that came from handling challenges gracefully. As the hours passed, the flight settled into a steady rhythm. The engine's hum became background noise, and passengers gradually adapted to the rhythm of travel. The flight attendant moved efficiently, attending to passengers, and maintained a courteous, professional presence. The earlier tension had fully dissipated, replaced with mutual respect and calm acknowledgement of boundaries and roles. The woman remained a subtle center of influence in the cabin. Without drawing attention to herself, she continued to command a quiet authority that affected the energy around her. Passengers nearby adjusted slightly in their seats, perhaps subconsciously mirroring her calm demeanor. Flight attendants approached interactions with renewed care, influenced by the clarity and composure she displayed. She took a moment to close her notebook and reflect quietly. The earlier events had offered an unexpected lesson in human behavior, influence, and respect. She had handled a moment that could have been uncomfortable or awkward with ease, grace, and dignity. Her calm confidence had naturally shifted the energy in the cabin, demonstrating that respect is often earned, not demanded. Even as the flight progressed smoothly, the impact of the exchange continued subtly. Passengers who had observed the events whispered among themselves, exchanging glances of recognition and admiration. The flight attendant carried herself with a renewed professionalism, attentive to detail and aware of the quiet balance that had been established. The pilot's brief acknowledgement had reinforced the woman's presence, leaving no room for doubt about her authority and right to occupy her space. The woman leaned back, allowing herself a deep breath. She appreciated the calm, the order, and the respect that now permeated the cabin. The small interactions, the subtle lessons, and the quiet acknowledgments had all contributed to a sense of balance and understanding. She reflected on how often life presented unexpected challenges, how small moments could reveal character, and how poise and composure could create respect without confrontation. Passengers continued their activities, some reading, some chatting quietly, some simply resting. The flight attendant moved efficiently, attending to everyone with professionalism and courtesy. The cabin had shifted from tension to calm, from uncertainty to respect, all without a single raised voice or dramatic display. It was a quiet transformation, driven entirely by the woman's poise and the subtle acknowledgement of those around her. As the plane cruised above the clouds, the woman allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The earlier challenge had been handled with grace, and the balance of respect had been fully restored. She had demonstrated that dignity, calm confidence, and quiet assurance could command acknowledgement naturally. The cabin was now a space of subtle order, calm, and professionalism, influenced by the quiet strength of one person's presence. The flight continued smoothly, and the woman reflected on the power of composure. Small moments, even brief exchanges, could reveal character and influence others in meaningful ways. Respect was not given lightly, nor was it demanded. It was recognized, often silently, through behavior, poise, and confidence. Today, she had witnessed this firsthand, and the lesson was clear. Quiet strength often leaves the most lasting impression. Passengers occasionally glanced toward the first-class section, sensing the subtle authority the woman carried. Flight attendants approached their tasks with renewed care, influenced by the clarity, poise, and dignity displayed in the cabin. And the woman, calm, focused, and serene, continued her work, her mind sharp, her presence unwavering. Even as the hours passed, the lessons of the flight remained in the air, a quiet reminder to everyone who observed. Dignity, patience, and composure can command respect in ways that words or confrontation cannot. The cabin, now calm and orderly, reflected the subtle power of human presence and the natural acknowledgement of those who carry themselves with quiet confidence. The plane continued its journey smoothly, the clouds stretching endlessly beneath the wings. The woman remained seated in first class, calm and composed, observing quietly as the flight moved along. She had turned what could have been a stressful situation into an opportunity to demonstrate patience, dignity, and strength. Now, with the cabin calm and the passengers relaxed, she allowed herself a small, contented smile. The flight attendant moved efficiently through the aisles, attending to passengers with care. Her earlier hesitation had disappeared, replaced with a quiet professionalism that seemed effortless. She offered assistance politely, smiled sincerely, and handled requests without any trace of doubt or uncertainty. Watching her work, the woman realized that her calm confidence had not only restored respect for herself, but it had influenced others to behave with dignity as well. It was a subtle but powerful effect. Passengers were settling into the rhythm of the flight. Some read quietly, others worked on their laptops, and a few leaned back, resting comfortably. Yet, in small ways, they were all aware of the presence in the first-class section. It wasn't an attention-seeking presence. It was a quiet authority, unspoken yet unmistakable. People instinctively respected it, and those who had observed the earlier exchange carried a sense of admiration that lingered like a soft undercurrent in the cabin. The woman glanced around the cabin briefly. There was a calm in the air now, a gentle order, and a subtle recognition of her role in restoring it. She didn't seek credit or acknowledgement. She simply existed fully in her space, calm and self-assured. That was enough to convey a sense of strength, a quiet reminder that confidence could speak louder than argument. The flight attendant paused for a moment near the beverage cart, taking a deep breath. She looked at the woman once more, this time with a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for your patience, ma'am. I appreciate your understanding," she said quietly. Her words were not forced. They reflected the respect she had come to feel naturally. The woman nodded politely, a simple gesture that conveyed acknowledgement and reinforced the mutual respect that had developed. The woman returned her attention to her notebook, jotting down ideas for her upcoming work. She had used the time on the flight wisely, turning an unexpected challenge into reflection and productivity. The experience had reminded her of the importance of calmness and patience, and she carried that lesson quietly within her. Life often presented obstacles, some large, some small, and the way one responded defined the impact of those moments. She had responded with composure, and the result was a quiet but undeniable recognition of her strength. Passengers nearby whispered softly to one another, some expressing curiosity, others admiration. A young man in business attire whispered to his companion, "Did you see how she handled that? So calm, so confident." Even the pilot respected her instantly. His companion nodded in agreement, eyes still directed subtly toward the first-class section. It was clear that the woman's demeanor had left an impression far beyond the immediate moment. The flight continued, the engines humming steadily, the cabin calm and orderly. The pilot occasionally glanced back from the cockpit, acknowledging the presence of the woman with a subtle nod. That small gesture carried significant weight. In just a few words, or in this case, a single acknowledgement, respect had been fully established. The pilot's recognition had reinforced the authority the woman naturally held in her space, making it clear to everyone in the cabin that her composure was both recognized and respected. The woman took a deep breath, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The challenge from the flight attendant, though small, had required her to assert herself with clarity and poise. She had not needed to raise her voice or argue aggressively. She had relied on patience, confidence, and quiet strength. In doing so, she had influenced not only the crew but also the passengers around her. It was a subtle form of leadership, one that relied on example rather than command. The flight attendant moved down the aisle once more, assisting passengers and offering drinks with a polite smile. She no longer exhibited hesitation or doubt. It was clear that the woman's calm confidence had left an impression on her as well. The shift in demeanor was subtle, yet unmistakable. The attendant now approached every interaction with renewed care, influenced by the quiet authority she had witnessed firsthand. Nearby passengers continued their quiet activities, but many still glanced toward the first-class section. There was a sense of curiosity mixed with admiration, a recognition that strength and dignity did not need to be loud to be effective. The woman's calm presence had demonstrated this truth clearly. It was a reminder that composure and self-assurance often commanded respect far more effectively than confrontation ever could. The woman leaned back in her seat, adjusting her small pillow and glancing out the window at the endless sky. The sun's light reflected softly off the clouds, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. She felt a quiet satisfaction in the way she had handled the situation. It had been a test of patience and character, and she had passed it with grace. The experience reminded her that even in ordinary moments, there were opportunities to demonstrate strength, composure, and dignity. The flight attendant paused briefly, glancing toward the woman again. This time, there was no uncertainty in her expression. She moved on to assist other passengers, carrying herself with a professionalism that reflected the subtle influence of the woman's presence. The cabin had transformed from a place of minor tension into a space of calm order, courtesy, and mutual respect. It was a testament to how one person's poise could impact the environment around them. The woman reflected on the subtle power of human interaction. Moments that might seem insignificant, an exchange over a seat, a question asked politely, a glance of acknowledgement, could carry weight far beyond their immediate context. She had learned that patience, composure, and clarity of presence were tools more powerful than confrontation or argument. Respect was not demanded. It was recognized, often silently, through behavior and demeanor. As the flight progressed, she allowed herself to relax further. The engine's steady hum, the soft murmurs of passengers, and the quiet efficiency of the crew created a sense of harmony. She took a moment to close her notebook, leaning back in her seat and reflecting on the journey so far. The earlier tension had passed, leaving behind a subtle but meaningful lesson in human behavior and the nature of respect. Passengers continued their activities, reading, working, or quietly resting. The flight attendant moved efficiently through the cabin, her demeanor professional and respectful. Even in small gestures, there was an acknowledgement of the presence and authority of the woman in first class. The shift in energy, subtle yet powerful, had become a natural part of the cabin's environment. The woman allowed herself to appreciate the calm. The challenge she had faced had been minor in the larger scope of life, yet it had provided a valuable reminder of the importance of composure and clarity. She had influenced the cabin without raising her voice, without confrontation, and without demanding acknowledgement. It was a quiet but powerful demonstration of the respect that comes naturally to those who carry themselves with dignity. The pilot returned to the cockpit fully, leaving the cabin in the care of the attendants. Even from the cockpit, there was an awareness of the atmosphere below. The calm order, the subtle recognition of the woman's presence, and the professional demeanor of the crew reflected a balance that had been established quietly but effectively. The influence of a single confident presence had extended throughout the cabin, creating harmony and respect without force. The woman leaned back, closing her eyes briefly, appreciating the simple comfort of the flight. She had turned a small challenge into a moment of quiet leadership, demonstrating patience, clarity, and poise. The cabin, once slightly tense, now reflected calm, professionalism, and acknowledgement. It was a testament to the subtle power of human behavior and the ability of one person to influence the environment around them. As the hours passed, the flight continued smoothly. Passengers settled fully into the rhythm of travel, some resting, some reading, some engaging quietly with devices. The flight attendant moved efficiently, attending to needs, and the pilot monitored the instruments from the cockpit. All around, the quiet acknowledgement of the woman's presence persisted, a subtle but enduring testament to her composure and confidence. Finally, as the plane began its descent, passengers adjusted in their seats, preparing for landing. The woman remained calm, poised, and prepared, ready to step off the plane and continue her day with the same dignity she had displayed throughout the flight. The earlier exchange, the subtle challenge, and the subsequent recognition had all reinforced the simple truth she carried with her. Patience, composure, and quiet confidence command respect in ways that words alone cannot. The flight attendant approached her one last time before landing, offering a polite smile. "Thank you for your patience, ma'am. I hope your flight was comfortable," she said sincerely. The woman nodded, her own smile gentle and appreciative. "Thank you. Everything was perfect," she replied. There was no need for further explanation. The acknowledgement was mutual, genuine, and complete. As the plane touched down smoothly, the cabin settled into activity. Passengers gathered their belongings, flight attendants assisted with care, and the energy was calm and orderly. The woman remained seated until the crew signaled it was time to disembark, maintaining her composure throughout. The respect she had earned and inspired remained with her, a quiet yet powerful presence as she prepared to leave the flight. Stepping off the plane, she carried herself with the same dignity and calm confidence that had defined the journey. The small challenge she had faced, handled with patience and poise, had left a lasting impression on the crew, the passengers, and even the pilot. It was a quiet but undeniable demonstration that composure and clarity command respect naturally, without argument, without confrontation, and without need for spectacle. As she walked through the terminal, the lessons of the flight remained vivid in her mind. She had turned a simple challenge into an opportunity to demonstrate strength, influence the environment positively, and reinforce the quiet power of confidence. Life often presented tests, some obvious and others subtle, and the way she had responded reflected a core principle she lived by. Patience, clarity, and composure shape respect far more effectively than force or argument ever could. The flight was over, but its impact lingered, on the passengers who had observed, on the flight attendant who had learned a quiet lesson in professionalism and humility, and on the woman herself, who had affirmed once more the power of dignity, patience, and quiet confidence. The story of the exchange, though small in the scope of life, was a reminder that respect is earned. Influence is subtle, and composure is a strength that resonates far beyond the moment it is displayed.